So great little story in that little song. And I want to start today by asking you a question. And the question is simple. So what's your story? Right? You ever have people sit down with you and they go, hey, what's your story? Right? I did that with somebody just this morning. I've heard an incredible story that I'll have to tell you another time. But it's a question I actually ask a lot of people, and I genuinely love to hear the answers, not just because I like to hear people's stories, which I really love to do, but I love to hear the way people frame up their stories. You know, there was a guy standing behind us that Friday night at a food truck where we were standing in line, and he started telling us this story, and he framed it up in a certain way. And there's people that I have coffee with all the time from Resonate that we sit down and I listen to how they frame up their story when I ask them, what's your story? So now you're all going to be going, oh, I got to think about this next time you ask me that. But anyway, here's the deal. Some people frame up their story through the lens of family. Some people frame it up, they'll start talking about their career. Other people will talk about where they went to school, or if they're a couple, they'll talk about how they met. And the thing is, we all have a story, right? And how we tell our story tells something important about us. So again, how do you tell your story? Think about that. How do you tell your story? Some of our stories include God. Some of our stories don't. This week, for example, the Boston Marathon bomber, you guys have heard about this, was found guilty. How do you think he tells his story? How do you think his radical understanding of God connects to how he tells his story? Richard Dawkins wrote a book called The God Delusion, which spent 51 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, was translated into 34 languages, and had worldwide sales of 9 million copies, and won him the honor of Author of the Year from the British Book Awards. Listen how he frames up reality. He says this: imagine, with John Lennon, a world with no religion. Imagine no suicide bombers, no 9/11, no crusades, no witch hunts, no gunpowder plot, no Indian partitions, no Israeli-Palestinian wars, no Serb-Croatian Muslim massacres, no persecution of Jews as Christ killers, no Northern Ireland troubles, no honor killings, no shiny-suited, bouffant-haired televangelists fleecing people of their money. Imagine no Taliban to blow up ancient statues, no public beheadings of blasphemers, no flogging of female skin for the crime of showing an inch of it. This is how Dawkins frames up reality. His story, how he frames his story, is that he is a committed atheist. That's one way you can frame your story. Consider Mother Teresa, whose commitment to God resulted in her going to work among the poorest of the poor, founding orphanages, winning a Nobel Peace Prize as a result. How do you think she tells her story, or would tell her story? How do you tell your story? You might not be a suicide bomber, you might not be a best-selling author, you might not be a nun, but you are living out of a story. A basic way that you frame up reality, a way you understand yourself and your life in the world around you. And just like the Boston bomber, or Richard Dawkins, or Mother Teresa, or your next-door neighbor, how you understand your story determines how you live every day. So one more time. What's your story? Seems like a bigger question now. This morning we jump into the first of our 10 big questions that every faith system or philosophical system has to answer in order to be a system. And the question, is there a God, which is our first question here, is far from an esoteric exercise in sort of philosophical navel-gazing. As we'll see this morning, this question is foundational to how we live our lives because it's foundational to how we tell our story. Is God a part of the story or not? Are we children of God, or are we random acts of nature? Are we made for a purpose, or simply at the head of the evolutionary food chain? Is my life about personal peace and affluence, or am I supposed to be on some kind of a mission? Can I cheat on my taxes? That's a real one for everyone this week, right? The question about God and the existence of God affects us every day. In our relationships, and how we choose to function in our jobs, and our values, and our priorities. The list goes on. And it also brings up lots of other questions when you start asking that question about God. And we want those questions to be part of the conversation this morning. So here's what we're going to do. If you haven't already done so, take out your phone, and I want you to text WELCOME to that number again, 21777. And then what's going to happen when you text it, you're going to get a little text back. I want you to pull out your phones here. You're going to get a little text back. I'm doing it with you. And then you're going to click on what comes back to you, the link that comes back to you. And then you scroll down and you'll find a place on the website that says questions. So you there? Click on the website. scroll down. Is it working? And then find that place where it says questions. Q&D, that's it, Q&D. Yes, mine's going really slow. I'm like, oh, that was a good idea. We're all doing it at the same time, so that won't be a problem. Didn't think about that. All right, so scroll down to Q&D, and then it's going to give you a space to write in a question. Now, you don't have to do it now, but anytime during the message, if something happens here where I'm talking about something and a question pops in your head, you text that question in. And then, by the time we get to the end of the day, at the end of the talk here, which is going to last all day. No, it's not. Just a few more minutes. I'm going to answer a few of these today, but then what we're going to do is we're going to create an online, ongoing conversation about each one of these questions each week. So we're going to be posting the questions on our Facebook page, and then I'm going to be answering them throughout the week. But we'll take a few of them today as part of our kind of Q&D thing. The other thing that's going to happen is Bobby is also going to be receiving the questions, and she's going to be turning them into part of the piece that she's doing over there. All right, you with me? Ready? This is a little different, okay? All right, so is there a God? Question number one. Let's jump in. Is there a God? Now, interestingly enough, this is not a yes or no answer. There are actually three options that theologians and philosophers have posited over the years, and even more interestingly, each one of the three answers requires faith. Now, here are the three ways to approach this. First of all, there's atheism, right? An atheist says there is no God, all this stuff is foolishness, we know for sure that there's just nothing else out there, it's just all random chance. So there's no way to empirically disprove the existence of God any more than there's a way to empirically prove the existence of God. So atheism actually takes faith. You have to say, I have faith in this idea that there is no God. It's not really more intellectual or fact-based, it's just faith in a different kind of unknown. All right, secondly, there's agnosticism. There's another way you can approach this question. According to Thomas Henry Huxley, a 19th century philosopher who coined the term agnosticism, he said it's not, quote, now you got to listen, this is kind of like being in Philosophy 101, but he says, it's not properly described as a negative creed, nor indeed as any creed of any kind, except insofar as it expresses absolute faith in the validity of a principle, that it is wrong for someone to say certain of an objective truth of any proposition unless he can provide evidence which logically justifies it. All that says is, basically, the agnostic says, we can't know. But it's really interesting. In the defining experience, the defining paragraph of agnosticism, the person who invented it says this, again, it's not a creed of any kind insofar as it expresses absolute faith in the validity of a principle. So it takes faith also to be an agnostic, but it's a faith in a different kind of thing. So that takes faith as well. So we're kind of leveling the playing field here, because now we get to theism. That's the third way to answer this question. Is there a God? Theism says, yes, there is a God, right? And not just a faith in God, but a faith that's based on the weight of the evidence. At church, obviously, we believe this approach. So what we're going to do this morning is we're going to talk about the weight of the evidence and how that evidence falls clearly, in my mind, in this direction out of these three things that you have to have faith in. So think about this for a minute. Again, atheism, agnosticism, theism, right? These are kind of the three ideas. So as you think of those, do those raise any questions in your mind? If so, text them in. And what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about these three logical reasons for theism. How do we get there with this? All right, first one is this. And these are things, by the way, that obviously I didn't invent. These are ways to look at this that have been created over thousands of years of philosophy and theology. But I'm just going to give you three of kind of the key pieces that people point to. The first one is this: right and wrong as a clue to the existence of God. If you've ever been in an argument, you've experienced this first idea, or this first kind of proof of the existence of God. So, someone takes something that's yours. Someone tells a lie that harms you. Someone cuts in line in front of you at the grocery store. Wait a minute, you say to them, what do you say? That's not fair. That's not fair. The existence of that ingrained sense of fairness in us, of morality, of universal right and wrong, is proof, theists would say, that we are more than just cosmic accidents. The idea that this is wired into us naturally, that it just happens, it comes out. That's not fair. It's the first thing that comes out. C.S. Lewis says this about this idea. He says, what interests me about these remarks is that the man who makes them, the idea of saying it's not fair, is not merely saying that the other person's behavior does not happen to please him. He's appealing to some kind of standard of behavior which he expects the other person to know about. And the other person very seldom says, well, to hell with your standard. Nearly always, he tries to make out that what he's been doing does not really go against the standard, but there's some kind of special exception. So what's he saying? There's something wired into us, all of us, about fairness, about right and wrong. It's there. Now, you could push back on this idea, so let's push back for a minute. One response is to say, well, okay, well, maybe the idea of right and wrong is just, rights and wrongs are kind of subjective. You might think one thing is right, I might think one thing is right. But there are certain things that we would all agree are right or wrong, right? The women who were kidnapped in Africa recently, we would all agree that's not a good thing. Hurting innocent children, we would all agree that's not a good thing. You guys, how many Breaking Bad fans do we have here, right? Breaking Bad. The whole reason that thing happened, the whole reason that became such a phenomenon is because everyone knew this guy was turning from good to bad. There's something wired into us. Another pushback against this idea of universal right and wrong is that this could be just the result of instinct, right? This could be sort of an evolutionary trait that teaches us to do things that are good for us. Well, that could be possible, but this doesn't account for selflessness that is universal to many of our most important beliefs. For instance, in story after story in human history, they venerate the idea of a person sacrificing themselves on behalf of others. People who lay down their lives on behalf of others are lifted up as heroes. An overriding instinct, evolutionary instinct for personal survival would not produce that kind of sacrificial impulse. All right, push back one more time. Another idea would be that, well, rights and wrongs have been socialized into us as human beings. They've been socialized into us. But again, theists would ask, where did the original idea to socialize these values come from? If they're socialized into it, somebody had to come up with that idea. How does that happen? Theists would say this doesn't arise spontaneously. They arise from someone outside of human existence. Now, we just got through studying the Sermon on the Mount on Sunday nights. And in it, Jesus makes a very interesting statement about 3/4 of the way through. He says, be careful of false prophets. And then he goes on to talk about this. And then he says something really interesting. He says, by their fruit you will know them. What's he doing? He's acknowledging the fact that a basic discernment of right and wrong is wired into all of us, if we can see by the fruit. So, first of all, right and wrong as a clue to the existence of God. What kind of questions does that raise for you? Right and wrong as a clue. If you have questions, text them in. All right, second one. Second key argument for the existence of God from a theistic point of view is literally all around us. Creation. Theists believe that creation, the vastness of the universe, from the vastness of the universe to the immediacy of our bodies is a sign to those aware enough to see God's hand in the process. And this is how it works. If you think about a syllogism, right? It goes like this. Whatever begins to exist must have a cause. The universe did begin to exist, therefore it must have a cause. The agent of causation, according to those who believe in theism, is God. So this is the way you walk through this. If you start talking about, well, this happened and this happened and this happened. You just keep asking the question, well, what caused it? What caused it? What caused it? What caused it? And you finally get to a point where you have to have faith in something. It's either an uncaused cause or a prime mover. Something or someone that caused creation to happen. Now, following from that is the sign of this incredible intricacy and complexity of the universe. The theist would say that it's not simply the result of random sophistication, but of intelligent design. That there's a reason behind how things look and how things work. Even people who are not theists go here. So here's what physicist and author Stephen Hawking, not a theist, says. He's calculated that if the universe's expansion rate after the Big Bang had gotten smaller, even by 1 part in 100,000 million, the universe would have been destroyed in a great fireball. So was that random? Did it just happen to happen in that little slice where it could work? Or was it initiated, planned? Was it held together by a greater being? Another way to think about this is a little easier than kind of some of this heady stuff that we're talking about, is to think about Michelangelo's David sculpture, right? You know the David sculpture. It's this beautiful thing, the intricacy, the beauty, the obvious craftsmanship of the work. Now imagine that somebody told you that it simply occurred in that formation over billions of years. Yeah, you know, it kind of sat out there, and then over years, you know, things just happened and it became what it was. Would you believe that? So overall, again, from a theistic standpoint, if there is a design, there must be a designer. And we start to look through this lens, what you see is the burden of proof begins to fall in a different direction. The burden of proof begins to fall not on the people who would say, yes, there is a creator, but on people who would say, well, it's creation out of nothing that created this incredibly intricate universe that we live in. Again, the Christian scriptures affirm this perspective. I love the Message Bible's translation of Romans chapter 1, verse 20. It says this: the basic reality of God is plain enough. Open your eyes, and there it is. By taking a long and thoughtful look at what God has created, people have always been able to see what their eyes can't see. Eternal power, the mystery of the divine being, so that no one is without excuse. So maybe your own experience affirms some of this. You know, haven't you ever stood watching the sunset over the beach in Santa Monica and thought, you know, there's something bigger than me at work here? So creation as a sign. Questions about that? Text them in. Think about that for a minute. Questions? All right, third, human experience as a confirmation. We have right and wrong as a clue. We have creation as a sign. But perhaps the most personal of all these arguments is the argument from human experience. Believers would make the argument that over thousands of years and a variety of human experiences, there have been many throughout the ages that have been attributed back to God and experienced by people. And generally this idea points to the idea, or the fact, that countless people of different eras have widely different cultures have claimed to experience God on a personal level. Answered prayers, specific guidance, interaction with God, conversion experiences, even miracles are examples of this. And these intimate interactions with God have had an astounding impact on the lives of individuals who experience them. And for theists, the vast number of people and the powerful impact of their experiences is strong evidence for the reality of God. Now, part of this whole series is not just Q&D, but it's also stories. So I thought today you're going to get to hear real stories of real people. So today I'm going to tell you a quick story about this from my own perspective. I can tell you about how I came into a relationship with God. I can tell you lots of things about my personal interaction with God, but probably the one that is the most apropos for this particular point is something that happened to me. It happened to me one time, and I don't know if it'll ever happen again. It happened when I was up in a monastery. I was practicing 2 weeks of ongoing prayer. It was this intensive experience that I went to partake in. And during that time, the guy who was the leader of the group said, okay, so for this one day, we're gonna spend like the entire day, not just the portion of the day, but we want you to try to spend the entire day in prayer. And my first question to him was, okay, well, what happens if I fall asleep? Because that's going to happen. And he goes, yeah, it happens all the time. If you do, it's all right, just go with it. So I'm praying, and sure enough, in about 2 hours, boom, I'm out, you know? But I had a dream in the context of falling asleep. And it was a really strange and highly symbolic dream, like nothing I've ever experienced. And when I woke up, something in me said, wow, that was something different than just the norm. So I go to the guy who's the leader of the group again, and the kind of the mentor, and I said to him, I said, hey, I got to tell you something that happened to me today. It was at dinner. And I said, I did fall asleep when I was praying, and I had this really strange, very symbolic, and really kind of weird dream. And he looks at me and goes, oh yeah, that happens all the time up here. I'm thinking, oh, I'm really spiritual. You know, he's like, oh yeah, it happens all the time. And then he goes, and let me tell you why it happens. He goes, most of the time it happens because God can't get to that person any other way but through a dream. Now I'm feeling really spiritual. And he goes, so here's what you need to do. you need to ask God for an interpretation of it. I'm like, okay, why didn't I think of that? So after dinner, literally, I go back to my room, and immediately, I mean, as the thought came into my head to pray, God, what's it? Boom, I understood the whole thing. It was the weirdest thing ever. I understood the entire thing in a flash. And it turned out to be about my marriage. Now, I won't go into all the details about it, but basically, it was a principle that I learned, and this was 20 years ago, that has carried me through our entire relationship. Probably the most important thing I've ever learned about how to relate in our marriage. So that's just one experience. If we opened it up, I'm sure many of you could also describe experiences that you've had with God that were personal experiences that are hard to deny. That don't just go to, oh, you know, well, I had a bad dream, I ate pizza or something, and then I had a weird dream, right? So this idea of human existence and the experience of human beings is perhaps the most powerful evidence that we have. Again, if you think of right and wrong as clues, that's really important. If you think of creation as a sign that there's an existence of God, but if you think of a personal experience, that's the biggest one. So I want to stop and see if we have questions. Has anybody texted? I don't have any questions that are coming in. So yes, no, yes. Do you? Oh, I'm not getting them. All right, tell me what the questions are. All right, so here's the question. Let's see. Okay. Oh, these are easy. All right. So here's the first one. Okay, so anyway, what we're going to do, all right, here's what he says. Some cultures sacrifice children. Who are we to say our morality is correct? So the way that would relate in terms of our relationship with God and the argument about God's existence would be, again, a sense of right and wrong. So these cultures who are sacrificing children, the question I would have is, did they really believe that was right? Can you imagine people really come to a point where they actually believe that was right? Another question, is theism the belief in any God or just a God in general? And where does Jesus fit in? That's a great question. So what we're talking about this morning is simply theism. We're talking about the existence of God, not what happens when we get to Jesus or Muhammad or anybody else. We're going to get to Jesus later. And actually, the Bible talks about Jesus as the reflection of God or the essence of God. So when we get to this, interestingly enough, we'll get to the point where we say it's not just about looking at God to understand Jesus. It's actually looking at Jesus to understand God. What if right and wrong are just things we learn from our parents? We talked about that. So the idea is, are we socialized into these things, or is there something deep inside of us that tells us what right and wrong is about? And I believe there is something deep inside about it. So. And then the last one here, what do I do when I've lost my faith? Wow, that's interesting. And again, a little off the beaten path from what we're talking about this morning. But you know, what I do when I feel like I'm losing touch with God is I continue to try to connect in some way. So there have been times in my life when I felt very far from God. And usually those times what I'll do is I'll say, hey, I don't feel like praying, I don't feel like reading scripture, I don't feel like doing any things I normally do. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get up in the morning, I'm going to read a psalm. And I'm going to send a one-line prayer up to God. Here's what I found. Those little connections are like a rock thrown in the pond that begin to reverberate over time. And if I do those things and if I stay connected, God is faithful to stay connected with me. All right, so we're going to be including these. We're going to look at some more of these, and then we'll be answering in more detail online over the course of this week, so you can kind of be checking that out. We'll send you a link to the Facebook page. But let me go back again one more time to this idea of human experience as the most powerful connection we have to this idea that God exists. Here's how one theist put it. O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit down and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You're familiar with all my ways. Before there was a word on my tongue, Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in behind and before. You lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, you are there. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light around me will become night, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. for you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. So that's the psalmist David's story, written thousands of years ago. And to show you how consistent this experience is, I want you to compare it to another story from today that I'm going to read you. This story comes to us from the writings of a man named Tom Schmidt, who I believe was a seminary student at the time. And this is a little long, and some of you have heard this in a different context, but it's worth hearing. So Tom writes about his weekly visits to this dank, ugly, smelly state convalescent hospital, the kind of place where no one would want to spend much time, and his connection there with a woman named Mabel. Now, Mabel was in such bad shape. She was 89 years old. She was in such bad shape that when the new nurses came on the floor, they would send them to Mabel to see if they could make it, if they could be able to handle her, they could handle anything. She was facially deformed. She was bedridden, nearly blind, deaf, and alone for 25 years. 25 years. Now, just listen to this. He says, I don't know why I spoke to her. She looked less likely to respond than most of the people I see on the hallway of the hospital. But I put a flower in her hand and I said, here's a flower for you, Happy Mother's Day. She held up the flower to her face and tried to smell it, and then she spoke. And much to my surprise, her words, although somewhat garbled because of her deformity, were obviously produced by a clear mind. She said, thank you, it's lovely. Can I give it to someone else? I can't see it, I'm blind. I said, of course, and I pushed her wheelchair back down the hallway to a place where I thought I could find some alert patients. I found one, I stopped the chair, Mabel held out the flower and said, here, this is from Jesus. That was when it began to dawn on me that this was not an ordinary human being. Later, I wheeled her back to her room and learned more about her history. She had grown up on a small farm that she had managed with her mother until her father had died, or her mother had died. Then she ran the farm alone until her blindness and sickness sent her to the convalescent hospital. For 25 years, she got weaker and sicker with constant headaches, backaches, and then cancer as well. Her roommates were 3 human vegetables who screamed occasionally but never talked. They often soiled their bedclothes, and because the hospital was understaffed, especially on Sundays when I visited, the stench was often overpowering. Mabel and I became friends over the next few weeks, and I went to see her once or twice a week for the next 3 years. Some days I would read to her from the Bible. Often, when I would pause, she would continue reciting the passage from memory, word for word. On other days, I would take a book of hymns and sing it with her, and she would know all the words of the old songs. For Mabel, these were not merely exercises in memory. She would often stop in mid-hymn and make a brief comment about lyrics she considered particularly relevant to her own situation. I never heard her speak of loneliness or pain except in the stress she placed in certain lines as she sang the hymns. It was not many weeks before I turned from a sense that I was being helpful to a sense of wonder, and I would go to her with a pen and paper to write down the things she had to say. During one hectic week of final exams, I was frustrated because my mind seemed to be pulled in 10 directions at once with all the things I had to think about. The question occurred to me, what does Mabel have to think about? Hour after hour, day after day, week after week, not even able to know if it's day or night. So I went to her and I said, Mabel, what do you think about when you lie here? And she said, I think about my Jesus. And the writer says, I sat there and thought for a moment about the difficulty of me for thinking about Jesus for even 5 minutes. And I asked, what do you think about Jesus? And she replied slowly and deliberately as I wrote. I think about how good he's been to me. He's been awfully good to me in my life, you know. I'm one of those folks who's mostly satisfied. Lots of folks wouldn't care much for what I think. Lots of folks would think I'm kind of old-fashioned, but I don't care. I'd rather have Jesus. He's all the world to me. And then Mabel began to sing. She said, Jesus is all the world to me, my life, my joy, my all. He is my strength from day to day. Without him, I would fall. When I am sad, to him I go. No other one can cheer me slow. So when I am sad, he makes me glad. He's my friend. And the writer writes this. I love this. He goes, this is not fiction. As incredible as it may seem, a human being actually lived like this. I know her. How could she do it? Seconds ticked and minutes crawled, and so did days and weeks and months and years of pain without any human company, without an explanation of why it was all happening. And she lay there and she sang hymns. How did she do it? The answer, he says, I think, is that Mabel had something you and I don't have much of. She had power. Lying there in that bed, unable to move, unable to see, unable to hear, she had incredible power. Here was an ordinary human being who received supernatural power to do extraordinary things. So that's Mabel's story. David, thousands of years before, Mabel, saying the same things. So one more time, how do you tell your story? I tend to tell mine like this. I'm a child of God. And I say that not because I know all of the answers about him or because I can understand everything there is to know about the existence of God, because God is too vast for that. I say it for a different reason. I believe that there is a God, not because I can understand him, but because I can know him. And because he knows me. Which is absolutely beautiful. Would you bow your heads? And as Josh comes, I just want you to listen one more time to these words from thousands of years ago that relate directly to this question: is there a God? Oh Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit down and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, and your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. And then here's the response to the question: is there a God? Search me and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in the everlasting way. So God, help us to be people of clear thinking. Help us to recognize the faith that it takes to land on any of these options: atheism, agnosticism, or theism. And my prayer is that you would reveal yourself to each one of us in a very specific way, even this week. So as we come back next week to talk about how we know truth, to talk about the Bible itself, what does that mean? How do we understand it? We would start from a place of having an experience with you. So we pray these things in the name of Jesus. Why don't you stand as we sing together?
Just these lyrics together we sing. on your heavenly throne. Soon you will be coming home. You're beautiful, so you're beautiful. This nice love of your eye. When we arrive at eternity's shore, where death is just a memory and tears are no more, we'll enter in as the wedding bells ring. Your bride will come together and we'll sing, you're beautiful.
We're going to receive our offering if the ushers would come and do that. And as they're passing it, let me tell you a couple other things that are going to happen. So after we're done here, we'd love for you to hang out with us over there. There's some donuts, there's coffee, that sort of thing. And then how many of you guys know about tacos por favor? Yes, you've been there. All right, if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. So this is about 4 blocks down, right up the street. So a bunch of us are going to head over there afterwards for lunch if you want to come and join us. Right, 14th and Olympic on the left-hand side of the street. So you're definitely going to want to come and be a part of that with us. So Josh, if you'll play, receive the offering, and then I'll come back for a closing prayer.
Stronger than the power of the grave, constant in the trial and in the change. This one thing remains. This one thing remains. Your love never fades and never gives up, never runs out. Let's just pray together. So God, I'm so thankful for today. I'm thankful that we've had this chance together to learn more about you, to worship you, to sing about you. And I just pray that you would just send us out in joy. Amen. We'll see you guys next week. Have a great week.